Hello once again, everyone. So one of the things that I've wanted to do for a little bit is I have been a bit lost in my subjects recently. So in between the regular series we're doing, I am going to be putting out these videos, which is a little more exercise focused. Now by exercise, what I'm talking about is I'm going to give you some drills that the students here at the school are currently working on, and certainly this will be a good resource for my students who are needing something to work on. I'm going to be kind of bouncing around between longsword, messer, rapier, backsword, all those sorts of things, and generally trying to put a slight lesson in with it. So today, we're going to be going over one that the longsword class has been doing a lot of, and that is the 3 points of cutting exercise. So what are the 3 points of cutting? Basically, within your arm, you have 3 main modes of cutting. You have your shoulder, your elbow, and then your wrist, and the attributes of each varies. So, to emphasize these a little bit, first off, let's talk about what we're getting out of each. So there are 2 kinds of cuts that you can do with a sword. In general, well, there's more than 2, but everything broadly falls under this category. The idea of a through cut, where I'm going all the way through my target that I hit, or the idea of a to cut, that I'm cutting out toward my target and then I'm going to work from that wedge. The advantage of a through cut is that when you throw through cuts or wide cuts, they reset you back to be able to cut again. When you throw 2 cuts, the advantage is that you are creating a shape that you can put your body behind and then proceed to do more things from. Generally, you're going to see more 2 cuts as direct attacks versus through cuts are for wider range or driving actions. So, with that in mind, our shoulders attributes are that it's going to give us a lot of emphasis on the through cut. Not that you can't 2 cut with a shoulder cut, we'll get to that later, but in general, it's going to be around the idea of just using these gross muscles to get what they need done. So, for starting off, go ahead and stand in a horse stance. You have the sword up on your dominant side, and I want you looking between your arms. Now the focus here is that I'm going to, of course, still be using my normal hand activation. I'm pulling from my left hand to get the sword moving down, and I'm pushing from my right hand to get the sword out, but I am going to cut all the way through and let my weight shift naturally onto the other side as I bring it up to load again. So I'm cutting shoulders up, shoulders up. You should pick a little target. In this case, I'm looking at my phone directly, and I should see the edge go through that central cutting target as I do my actions, okay? Now, once you've done this relatively comfortably and you're used to just this moving, you can start adding your feet into it. Now for the feet, all we're going to be doing is we're going to be stepping in a wide triangle step. So if I'm centered right now, my first step will take me here. My second step is going to take me to the other side of where I started. This should be a relatively wide step on both sides because that's the way you're going to be implementing this. So, again, I am up now. My left foot is forward because I'm right-handed, and I'm going to wide cut up, wide cut up. And again, I'm just cutting through those targets. I am less worried about my feet and much more worried about my arms are still doing everything they were doing. Just now my hip naturally moves. Now, one of the things you may find as you're practicing this is that you accidentally over-rotate a little bit, wherein I'm now turning more this way. You want to mitigate that by keeping your cuts and your attention focused on watching through that target and not adding any excess spin. The lateralness of this cut is coming from the fact that I'm coming from this wide angle on both sides, not the changing of my foot position. So, once you're comfortable with that, you can do it with or without. You can also do this moving forward and backward, but I recommend doing it in place, as that will allow you to focus a little more on what your arms are doing. Now, next we move down to the elbow. Really important caveat when it comes to elbow cuts. They can cut like a shoulder cut. You don't want to do that though. You'll hear a lot of people tell you don't cut from the elbow, and I've said it multiple times. And the reason for this is that you can give yourself strain very, very easily. Instead, if you're going to effectively cut with the elbow, what you want to be looking for is extension. So really, less of this and much more of this. And for this, there's no better position than going ahead and starting at the shoulder. So again, we'll go back to our horse stance. I have the sword at the shoulder, my elbows are in, both hands are behind the sword, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to pull, push, out, then I'm going to reload, out. And I am cutting from about 30 to 45 degrees from each side. I'm not stopping the sword because I'm cutting a 2 cut. This is making a strong wedge that I will be safe behind. Once you're comfortable with this, you can start adding a little bit of movement to it. So again, now this step, I'm not looking to step wide anymore. I'm looking more instead to step into a narrow stance. So the idea here is that we've got our central line. I would like both of my feet to end up on one side of the line with me behind my sword when I finish. Then I reset, and I step behind that shape again. So notice I slightly curve in on both sides. Now one of the common mistakes I see when people do this is that they pull their sword back too soon. So what we want is, boom, I'm safe, now I reload, boom, I'm safe, now I reload. We don't want to see this, because this is taking away the one thing that was protecting you. So, you can do that with or without movement. Next, we'll go ahead and move now into the wrist cuts. Now, wrists are funny. They can do either, both through and to cut, and the reason for this is because you have the lever. Basically, when it comes to using elbow and shoulder, that's all pretty much controlled by my right hand being attached to the arm. But when you start implementing the left hand a lot more, your wrists, that's where this turns into the ball and socket joint, and this can now add a lot to it. Now, the difficulty of implementing lever cuts is that, one, they're a tool, not a crutch. Lever cuts can do everything that your shoulder and elbow can do, a little bit worse. Because, one, they lack the presence. So I'll often say power, but really what I really mean is that if a shoulder cut lands on something, I'm either going to go through or I will stop with good structure. And from there I could then do responses. With a direct cut with an elbow, boom, definitely, even more so. A wrist though, on the other hand, while I can, it's not going to have the same lineup behind it because it's smaller muscles and it's originating from extension. Now, the flip side of that is that wrist cuts are some of the fastest cuts you can do. Not because they're literally faster, I mean there is an attribute of that, but more because they are the only cuts that can happen from extension. So the idea of me being able to use an elbow cut to get out and then I can wrist cut from there has quite a bit of appeal, which is why later period stuff, when we're holding the arm extended, pretty much everything becomes a wrist cut. So, with that in mind, the other thing that elbow cuts have is that they can do both through and to cuts. Now for this pattern, to do it well, right, is going to be a little bit finicky. We'll get to that when we get to the feet, but essentially, we're going to stand in an unnatural position. Rather than starting out fully extended, which is where most of your cuts will come from when it comes to using the wrist, I want us to start cutting from our dominant side. So instead we're going to come out here. Essentially, your edge is up, this is sort of like a medium guard, your edge is up toward your dominant side, and your very first cut is going to be a through cut. I'm already set up to do so. All I need to do is pull the pommel, and that's cutting, just down. Now, I'm not going to stop that momentum. I'm going to cut, and I'm going to let the sword keep going down into this hole by pushing my pommel underneath my wrist. So, see how my wrist goes under. So through, I turn over, and my tip keeps going on that circle. I'll throw it from the side now. So, boom, turn. Now, the next point that I will cut from is I'm going to bring it up so it's lined up with my left shoulder. From here, as soon as it's lined up, I can start my cut again by pulling with the pommel. Now I open my hands as it continues the circle, and that allows me to bring it back up. You can do the through cuts as individual, but generally if you're doing two in a row, go ahead and combine them. So for reference, this would be a single wrist cut. I should end up where I started. This is a double wrist cut, because I am able to use the fact that I'm halfway through essentially to power that left cut. So that's going to be our two through cuts. So it'll look 1, 2, and notice that this is all my left hand. I don't want to see this stuff, right? We don't want to be coming back. I want from extension. It's all the left hand doing the work here. Now, next, we're going to add the two cuts with it. So the way this works is all I do is once I'm lined back up, I just pull the pommel to me, and I extend straight out. I then push my pommel forward, reload, aim on my left shoulder, pull the pommel to me. Reload, aim the pommel back. So my two cuts look like this. Boom, reload, aim, boom, reload, aim. Very mechanical, very simple. And all I'm doing is from extension. Now, when you combine these together, you start to get this. So, through cut, two cut, two cut, through cut, two cut, two cut. Now, I'm making it quite efficient. When you add the footwork into it, you want to start adding a couple more considerations. So, remember the attributes we talked about with our through and two cuts. Through is not going to give me a shape to fight behind. I need to be ready to spring again. To is all about making something that can protect me in the middle. So, for our footwork here, because we're starting from extension, if you are right-handed, start with your right foot forward, because we're already set up to do our dominant side cut. So I cut with no step, so boom. Then I'm going to go ahead and step wide with my second cut, boom. Now for my next two, it's all about lining up directly. So I pull on that pommel, step behind it, reload, aim, step behind it. Now if I want to just reset, I reload, aim, put my right foot forward again, and I'm ready to go from there. So I'll show that one more time. Right foot is forward, hands are on the side of the lead foot for once. Through cut, no step, through cut with step, two cut with step, two cut with step. And then I can just reset. However, if you wish to keep it going continuously, once you finish that second two cut, we're going to do a little preparation. So here's that again. I cut through, cut two, aim, fire, cut two. Now here, once I've finished my cut, so it's out, I just pull the pommel away, which forces my sword to go down into that hole, and I do another wide step. Boom! And we're back into that first cut. Two cut, wide step, two cut, and then you can stop at your will. Now, especially if you're doing these in a row, the biggest thing to watch out for is ensuring that you are doing this all from extension. So I'll show this from the side. Essentially, I'll go ahead and start standardly. I'll go through it as I talk. I want to make sure that everything is happening at this distance, right? Boom, boom, out, boom, boom, out. And I'm not letting myself, especially on the two cuts, start to come back to my elbows. It's very easy to end up with that happening where you'll boom, boom, but then you'll find yourself resetting back and powering with an elbow cut, which, don't get me wrong, is the stronger, superior cut, but it's not what we're focusing on right now. So, that's great. That's all this with movement. What else can we get from it? Next, we're going to start combining some of these pieces. So, let's say you can actually do this with any cut you know. Just look for what attributes is causing what, but these are the ones I recommend. So firstly, we're going to go ahead and combine wrist and shoulder. So the attribute here is that the wrist is going to give us quickness of preparation. The shoulder is going to give us spring. So, no, hang on. We'll do wrist and elbow first. Let's do wrist and elbow first. We will get to wrist and shoulder. So, or rather shoulder and elbow. But anyway, for this, you can again start in place. Sword is out and extended. The wrist gives us our tight preparation, so we push the pommel under, which raises up our guard. I am not pulling this back to me. It's well out ahead of me. Boom. I push the pommel forward along my arm, and I uncross my hands. Now, if I just were to pull the pommel, cut goes up. So I need to take that time to now employ the elbow extension, which is really just more of my triangle, so the point between sword and my body, lining up behind my shape. So here's that again. Up, rotate, in. Now I do the other side. Up, rotate, in. And this turns into this sort of cut, where I'm using the attributes of my wrist and my elbow in conjunction. You can add footwork to this, wherein all you're going to do is, of course, pass when the actual cut is coming out. So what we want to see is, we'll start this way. Well, we'll start this way. Up, down, boom, not where the step is happening on the preparation. That's how you get stabbed. Okay? So left foot is forward, sword is extended, hands cross, cross some more, uncross, flip the body behind it. Hands up, down, over, around. That's combining again the wrist and the elbow. The elbow for its directness, the wrist for its speed and preparation from extension. It also guards your head at the same time. Now, the next combination is going to be our shoulder and our elbow. So what's going to happen for here is that we're going to lengthen the run-up. Essentially, the elbow cut is already one of the most superior cuts you can get, right? Here, boom. Nothing extra needed. I go straight to target. I make a good wedge. With your footwork behind it, generally, you will have a good result throwing a cut like that. The downside is sometimes you need to add just a little bit extra to it. This can be extra in regards to adding a little bit of outwardness, which the shoulder will give it, or alternatively, giving yourself a little more depth. So what we're going to do is we're going to load our elbow back a little further, and we're using the shoulder for this. The analogy that I use is, imagine that you have a little RC car, or like Hot Wheel car. God, I love those things. You have a ramp that you want the car to get airborne off of. If you go from, reasonable distance, car hits the ramp and goes up. If you have a longer run up though, it will gain more speed and go farther. This is the same idea. The actual portion of the car hitting the ramp has not changed. We have just made the run up longer. This is important, I'll explain why in a minute. So, you start at the shoulder, and we'll start this without footwork. I'm going to kick myself back by turning my torso toward the camera, but I keep my eyes on what I'm finding. This is turn my torso sideways. The motion I combine that with is I'm just lifting my hands like so. So I'm not draping it down my back, I'm just lifting my hands. When I do these two things together, I get into a nice over-the-shoulder, this is posto di donna, well technically posto di donna soprana, but this is the sort of depth we're looking for, or Zornfeld if you do German stuff. And the idea here is that my motion is coming up, boom, and I steal power from the shoulder because I have that run up. So here's it from the front. Turn, lift, nice stretch here, nice activation, I can see clearly. Run up, boom. And I'm not firing until I'm here at the shoulder again. We don't want to see this, you notice how that's way too wide of a cut. And that's true on both sides. So after I cut, I return to my other shoulder, twist, lift, return to my other shoulder, twist, lift, other shoulder, twist, lift. Nice and straightforward, and I'm using that core to do it. Now when you add footwork into this, you can start to play around with how much you spring. This one is going to feel better springing more forward, but play around with it going out. It's still an elbow cut, so we want to make sure we're lining ourselves up behind what we land as opposed to going all the way through. So, my left foot is forward, I turn my torso, I lift. If you're familiar with it, you can also play a little bit with the volta stabile here. It will feel quite natural, but I don't necessarily have to. I then out, reload, twist, rearm, out, and just that nice simple motion of twisting then lifting is getting myself all lined up to where I want to be. You can also play around with combining this with the shoulder where it cuts all the way through as you can with the one before. Now, let's talk about probably the most complicated one, combining the wrist with the shoulder. So far we've been working either upper arm or lower arm, and those all blend pretty well. But wrist and shoulder are opposites of each other, right? No middle ground. So one example of combining these two that really lets them both shine is we're going to use the wrist from extension to get back to our shoulders to then come back in again. This is one of the harder things of fighting once your sword is already extended is your area to generate power negates significantly. You can still line yourself up, which is why we start to see things like bind work, etc., or closing into grapple, where we're using the wedge as a shield. But there are times that you've gotten to extension and you can't do that. And so you need to be able to come back, sometimes guarding yourself, sometimes just reloading yourself, and then either go in again, or just come back to then defend your general area. Because once your sword is extended, it can only do so much. So, with that in mind, we're going to go for the same sort of preparation we did before, wherein I'm going to start with my sword extended and cross my hands. Now my first wrist cut is going to be with the back edge. So I'm going to push my pommel forward as I squeeze with my lead hand's arms. That's giving me a nice little short edge cut across the target. Here's that again. 1. Now, as I've kind of given away by showing my arms, the next thing I do is I'm going to open up. So what I am not doing is keeping my wrist tight. That would lead into me doing a secondary wrist cut. What I'm doing is I'm cutting, and then I'm letting myself pivot off of that forward pommel to bring myself back and load up on my dominant shoulder. So here's that again. Cut, open. Now I can steal from these and go ahead and implement the rest of that cut through. So my sword is extended, up, through target, through target. Now I can do that on the other side. Up, through target, through target. Note that I'm taking that half second before I cut. It's easy to accidentally turn this into cutting like a shoulder from an elbow because you're impatient. Let it fully reload, feel this all lock in, then throw your next cut. This one I will say personally always feels better with a little bit of footwork because since it is a through cut, you'll want to step with it. So I'll go ahead and start implementing that. So, boom, boom, and I can just bring back to the shoulder. We'll go ahead and go to extension again. Boom, boom. Extension, 1, 2. Extension, 1, 2. I'm always taking that time to open, see between my arms, then I use that shoulder. Now, if you really want to be fun, you can start combining these so you're doing all three. So for example, I'm out extended, wrist, shoulder, now I'm at the elbow, but specifically I'm loaded shoulder, elbow, now I'm at extension, oh I know something I can do from here, guard, direct, between wrist, and then elbow again. So here's that pattern again. You are left foot forward, your sword is extended, cross the arms, short edge, wrist cut, into long edge, shoulder cut, onto your other shoulder, because we did a through cut, shoulder, elbow for the direct cut, lift, wrist, elbow for directness, and then you can start on the other side. So now I lift on the other side, my through wrist to shoulder, shoulder to elbow, wrist to elbow. And that's a nice simple little pattern that you can do for some funsies. But the whole purpose of this exercise is you will always be cutting with combination, right? You're never going to be able to 100% exclusively do just cutting from your shoulder, just cutting from your elbow, just cutting from your wrist, because your arm is attached to itself. But the attributes of what's powering what, and when you choose to do certain things, can make a huge difference in your fencing. In particular, in choice between through and two cut. One of the things I see a lot that happens, especially with more beginners, is I tell them to cut two, and they can't. Not aren't able to, but can't. So for example, I want to cut right toward the camera. I know I only need to use muscles that push me forward. Even if I'm in a big, deep position, I only need to use the ones that are getting me there. And I got a little extra run up. Same thing too. Let's say I'm up here. Okay, my shoulders are loaded, but I want to cut to the camera. So I make sure that my cuts are going forward, not down. That allows my sword, I'm not stopping it, it's cutting out. What happens oftentimes is that people, because they're not used to the idea of, oh, I just need to extend, they just contract their muscles, and that leads to them, oh, well, I'm cutting through, so I gotta stop myself, and now we get stuck in the quasi-land. You'd rather be all the way down or at a target, not here. So, paying a little attention to, do I want to cut through, or do I want to cut to? What gives me the best way of doing that can make a huge difference in just everything making a little more sense, and also in choice. So one of the ones that I personally really, really harp on is when you get the opportunity to blast someone in the side of the head with a left cut. Okay? Generally, this is done during such situations as abnehmen, so taking off. This can also come in during cuts such as the colpi di volano, for those of you that are Italian. Basically, you get outside of your opponent's sword, their head is nice and clear, and you can send them straight to Broadway. The issue with this is that while undoubtedly it is one of the finest finishing blows that exists in any sword system, because it's a backhanded cut with two hands, that by default has more strength than most people are used to wielding. The issue with it comes in that it has very short range because your hands are crossing. So a lot of people get too close. And along with it, all that force goes down. Now, if you want to cut through target, no problem. But if you want your friends to still like you at the end of the training day, now you need to make a choice. So if you haven't seen my video on how to not hurt when you hit, I'm going to kind of link back to that here. The idea is that by choosing to cut with extension when I have a clear target and not hew through where everything is going down into a target, but instead out through a target, I will minimize the amount of force. And furthermore, by cutting out with extension, most of the time you're going to feel that has a little bit more control because gravity doesn't have a say. Even my most controlled through cut, gravity is saying something during that. But a two cut, only at the first bit, then it's all about extension, like a thrust. So, with that in mind, you find yourself in a situation, we'll use the colpi di volano because I can do it against the air very easily. I guard high, okay? Now I'm off to my opponent's side, I can take that time to line up, and I could then direct my cut. The mistake would be to turn over all the way and put that shoulder into it. And I see that a lot. But instead, once you're safe, once I got this opportunity to turn over, why don't I cut to my target instead? Now everything is ending up nice and against their head from extension rather than hewing through. And I do this in pretty much any time I cut from my left side, no matter what the cut is. You know, this vertical, for example, it's to, not through anymore. And that goes a long way, not only in being kinder to your friends, not causing injury, increasing your aim as well, but also when your opponents learn how to parry this, you're going to find yourself, oh, now my sword is out and bound on them. I can do things from here, rather than, well, they blocked it, this is bad. So, look for opportunities where you can make that choice, and I think that you will find a little more success in your fencing. But either way, like I said, this is the 3 points cutting exercise, going over what's doing what, practice it often, and start seeing if you can find your favorite cuts, what's powering what, and could you make it more efficient as you go. Pretty much any action, thrust, cut, will have these attributes, but it's most exemplified by the cut. So, next time I will go over a rapier exercise, and we'll move on to backsword. Otherwise though, thank you very, very much. We'll go over some other techniques another time.